Hi everyone, this is video number 2 of the Feminist Agenda. Today I will be presenting a very brief introduction to feminist thought. I will kind of be building on some of the concepts that I already talked about in my first video, so if you haven't seen that, feel free to go on the episodes tab of thefeministagenda.com or just find it on YouTube as well. So we'll be starting with defining some foundational terms such as gender, feminism, and intersectionality, among others. We will also be exploring different types of feminism and the historical emergence of feminist thinking. And I will also explain the relationship between feminism and feminist theory and why this relationship is so important to our understanding of the history of feminism and the evolution of all these movements. So let's just start by defining some core concepts so that we're all on the same page. I will be expanding on all of these definitions throughout the series. This is just kind of a brief outline of these terms. So starting with gender. Gender refers to the culturally determined categories, attitudes, behaviors, and belief systems about femininity and masculinity. While gender can interact with biological sex within different contexts, it is inherently different from ascribed biological sex because it is a constructed political, economic, and social category. A lot of people like to think about gender with this spectrum analogy, and although that's very helpful for understanding the fluidity and the variability of gender, I think that spectrums also present binaries. A lot of people, specifically non-binary or two-spirited people, don't necessarily fall anywhere along that spectrum. So as long as we're aware of the limitations of the analogy and, we start to reflect on binaries, we can kind of get a different perspective on gender. And that brings me kind of closely to this next point right here. So sex refers to the descriptive, biologically based variables such as anatomy or DNA used to distinguish between male and female. Now, usually sex is also thought of as a binary, male and female. But scientifically, this binary has been proven to be kind of faulty in that there's a lot of intersex people that exist within our population and within the populations of other countries. And intersex individuals at the biological level either have both male and female genitalia, such as hermaphrodites, have both testosterone levels or estrogen levels that mimic that of a man or a woman but have different body characteristics, or are genetically even combined at the chromosome level. So by definition, they would be either, both male and female or neither of those categories. So this kind of makes us reflect about spectrums and binaries and how they work. But also, I think that it's helpful to think about sex and gender more as a web. And what I mean by that is that you have all these interconnecting parts of sexual orientation, gender identity, biological sex, and gender expression working together at the same time to create these complex identities instead of thinking of male, female, masculine, feminine. And that kind of also brings me to my next point about sex roles. So sex roles are patterns of culturally approved behaviors of masculinity and femininity. These are also socially constructed. So the best example, everyday life example that I can give about this is like if you walk into a toy store, you will see a boy section and a girl section. And acknowledging that there are some toys that are unisex, most toy stores kind of have this very clear split in the types of toys, the colors, the themes that are presented to each gender or sex identity, whether that's boys or girls. And so we really have to think about, like, when babies are born, they don't naturally gravitate towards a kind of toy or color pattern or theme unless they are raised with certain ideas or expectations or colors. And we really need to understand how this kind of works. Another example that I can give is kind of like the gender reveal parties, which are really like sex reveal parties, in which colors or themes are assigned to a baby before it's even born. Like these are the kinds of ideas that are constructed about masculinity and femininity, and we should understand how this is working in our society. So now to the more contested term of this term series, feminism. And what is feminism? Is it a man-hating, child-hating, motherhood-hating ideology? Well, the short answer is no, because it's actually a range of movements and ideologies that are both social and political that aim to end sexism, sexual exploitation, and the oppression of all kinds and all peoples. So a lot of people like to brand feminism as a singular entity. Something I hear very widely talked about is like feminism being equality of the sexes. There are so many theories, so many movements, many of which are conflicting in regards to feminist ideology, but for the most part, all kinds of feminism at its core tend to address some sort of sexism and specifically some source of oppression. So we need to understand that not all feminism is about equality. Some feminists even question what that even means or whether it's necessary. And we really need to kind of branch out and expand our notion of feminism as more than just one kind of ideology represented by one specific group with a certain goal. It's really more than that. And this brings me to another important aspect, intersectionality. This is very important for understanding the evolution of the feminist movements throughout history, and notice the plural feminist movements here. And intersectionality basically explores the overlap of various social identities, such as race, gender, class, and sexuality, and the relationship to a systemic type of oppression or a disadvantageous position. It allows us to look at people's overlapping identities and experiences in order to understand the complexity of prejudices they face. So this next visual will hopefully help you understand this a little bit better. So intersectionality was first coined in a 1989 paper called Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex, a Black feminist critique of anti-discrimination doctrine, feminist theory, and anti-racist politics, which was written by law professor and social theorist Kimberly Crenshaw. And from this term, intersectional theory then emerged as Black feminists, who were often called womanists, began to write about the exclusionary nature of the mainstream white middle-class feminist movement of the 70s and 80s. And we're going to talk more about this period in some future videos, but for right now, all you have to understand is that as women of color, Black women could not relate to the experiences of white middle-class homemakers or even white middle-class feminists, and therefore had to develop their own movements and their own theories. A modern example of how we can apply intersectional theory to a problem that we're facing today in society can be seen in the disproportionate rates of violence and sexual assault of trans Black women. So, as I mentioned in my previous video, among all of the crimes that are committed against specifically people of the LGBTQ community, trans women stand out as being one of the most targeted groups for violence and sexual assault. And so this shows us the disproportionate levels of discrimination that they face as Black trans women. And so here in this example, you see the intersection of race, sexual orientation, and gender identity all working together to create this system of oppression and discrimination against a particular group. Likewise, there are groups that also merge other identities to have power, and we need to understand these power and discrimination dynamics in order to get a full picture of the history of feminisms in the United States. So now on to some different types of feminisms. First, I'm going to provide a very brief history of feminist thought so you can see how recent the term feminist and feminism really is. But so you can also see how old feminist thinking is. So starting in 1405, this is one of the most noted historical documents that we have of original feminist thinking, and that the Book of the City of Ladies, which was published and written by French woman Christine de Pizan, who actually argued against these common literary notions at the time that women were nonsensical and immoral by nature. A lot of this was based on religious thinking, but this is kind of like the first historical source that we have of feminist thinking. And then in 1792, English woman Mary Wollstonecraft published A Vindication of the Rights of Women. as a witness to the revolution, the French Revolution, Wollstonecraft really wrote about the importance of educating women and outside of the home, really giving them a holistic academic education. And then following in her footsteps in 1844, the American transcendentalist writer Margaret Fuller also advocated for female education in her book called Woman in the 19th Century. So it wasn't until 1906 that the earliest use of the word feminist in the US was attributed to an article that was written by Madeline Pelletier. And this kind of gives you, again, a sense of how recent this term really is. But then in 1910, the term feminism became more widely used, and actually throughout the 20th century, feminism expanded significantly to cover a range of perspectives. And so today, feminism is a part of all social, economic, and political discourses that we can think of. So here I compiled kind of some of the most talked about, most widely written about types of feminism. But keep in mind, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There are many more that I just would not have the space to talk about. But throughout the series, we're going to be kind of covering these and other kinds of feminisms. Also, it's important to keep in mind that with any movement, some aspects of the movement can become more emphasized in the media, more highlighted, or placed under the spotlight, and feminism is no exception. For the most part, liberal feminism and radical feminism have dominated conversations about feminism throughout history, but it's important that we acknowledge all of the other different ideologies and everything that they bring to the table. So keep that in mind and kind of try to have a renewed understanding for all of these different philosophies. So lastly, I'm going to explain the relationship between feminist theory and feminism and why it matters. So most feminist scholars actually agree that for somebody to actually practice feminism, they need to have a concrete understanding of oppression, where it manifests itself, and how to actually fix it. And I also believe that, and part of the reason why I made this project was to bridge the gap between action and understanding. So theory is providing you the understanding of all of these inner workings. Given that understanding, feminism is then the application of that understanding. It is the action. So another way to think about it is theory provides the tools for you to understand oppression, where it exists, how we can fix it, and feminism is the actual practice of then going and fixing that oppression, fixing those systems, and for many, restructuring completely the social and economic / political structures that we have today. So this quote kind of summarizes very neatly what I am trying to say, but basically, constructing feminist theory is a social practice and a form of labor. Just as textile workers weave yarn and thread to create fabrics, feminist theorists weave concepts and ideas to better understand the gendered fabric of social life. And you can also find more about this reading and more of these quotes under the Tools tab of my website, thefeministagenda.com. This book, Reading Feminist Theory, is available there for free, along with many other documents that I am going to be referencing throughout this series. So feel free to check that out. And before you go, think about these questions, reflect on these questions, discuss them with your peers, with your family, or even in the comment section below. I hope that these prompt you to think about some modern applications of theory and feminism today, and I will see you guys next time for a historical overview of the origins of feminism. Thank you.